Escape from Giant's Crown. Chapter 12. We'd Better Stick Together. Stillness. Then came a slow rumble at their feet. The halls of the Great Peach thumped and swayed. But it was more than that. The entire giant itself began to shimmy. With the doomsday device scattered in pieces across the floor, the giant had been awakened from his long nightmare, and he was none too happy about having a city of pesky parasites mining his body for minerals and building a city on his back. "The giant?" Byron screamed like a frightened child as he ran in circles, slipping and falling across the unstable marble flooring. "He's awake? Oh no, 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 no!"
"You fool! You'll kill us all!"
Orchid cried out. Her wooden tendrils flailed, reaching for something solid to grab onto until attaching to the stage pillars. But the supports gave out almost instantly, crumbling on top of her. The entire peach had begun to sway back and forth in the chaos as the giant took his first steps in 100 years. It swayed so wildly that several peaches fell clean off of their branches outside the window. Others cracked and came apart in pieces. The pillars in the great hall of the largest peach gave out, and half of the ceiling collapsed on top of Orchid, muffling her screams. Chunks of stone and fruit clattered down onto the city rooftops below. Byron clung to Mao's leg in terror. "We've got to get out of here!" he cried. "We'd better stick together if we're going to survive this!" One of those fancy chandeliers crashed beside him. Oliff nodded in reluctant agreement. He despised Byron, but he wasn't about to let him die, even if he was a sniveling rat. When the flooring angled just right, Oliff, Mao, and Byron lurched themselves across the slick floor over to the entrance corridor leading to the carriage rail where they'd left Dindle. With each step the giant took, more of the city was destroyed. As he bucked and twisted, city structures crumbled and slid off its immense body in a gooey mess of peach and stone. The screams of men fleeing for their lives could be heard for miles around. The initial shaking sent half of the rut tumbling to the ground, including a good number of the structures in the section where Oliff had left Bartol. He feared the worst, and there was no time. As they clumsily made their way to the carriage, the peach tilted hard in a sway that flung the three of them into a room of corpses. Now, without the aid of Orchid's illusions, they saw the real horror of the peaches. Each and every one of the bodies in that small room had been sucked dry of their life essence. Peach pins lay scattered across them in discarded piles. The stench was unbearable. Byron fell to his knees as he saw a familiar face as well. "Good heavens! It's Dr. Wheezy!" "Or at least what's left of him," Mao said. Oliff took off his hat and mourned the poor doctor's death. It was a terrible sight, and it weighed on Oliff's heart to see so many familiar faces. Men he'd given their final peach pin. This was their real reward. This was the top of the mountain that they'd spent their lives striving to reach. It was all a grand illusion. Now, not much more than a very old corpse, Wheezy's face had been shriveled to a thin layer of skin stretched over his skull. The metal knob where he'd normally attached medical devices was now just a metal bolt sunk in a cold, dead eye socket. Upon his chest he wore 5 peach pins. Byron's eyes welled up. "Oh, poor Dr. Wheezy. You were a faithful—" "Ah!" Wheezy reached out and grabbed hold of his hand. "Good heavens!" Byron gasped. "He's still alive! Save me!" Wheezy breathed. Byron panicked and smacked Wheezy's skull with the thick end of his cane, forcing him to release his bony grip. Byron scuttled back, then bolted down the corridor for the rail carriage. "Oh, no you don't!" Oliff yelled. Not to be left behind, he grabbed Mao by the arm and followed in quick pursuit. "What happened to sticking together?" Oliff called out. But the mayor ignored them in his panicked retreat. Byron ran pell-mell, dodging through the rubble and sliding through the marble hallways as fast as his miserable legs could carry him. From there, he could see that the rail to which the cart was attached still coiled around the giant's arm. He hoped it would take him to his mansion, where he kept an escape balloon for emergency situations. He was nearly home free. He just needed to get back to Dindle and the carriage. "Oi! Mayor Byron, sir. I's kept her ready, just like you asked," the ever-loyal Dindle announced as his esteemed boss ran up. "Oh, that's a good fellow now," Byron panted. "I knew I could count on you, dear Dindle. Great work." But before Byron could reach him, the entire floor of the peach cracked, causing the primary support pillars, which attached to the station underneath, to buckle. The impact jostled the carriage, disengaging it from its receiving latch, sending Byron to the ground and flinging Dindle off of the platform and over the guardrail. His hand swung out to grip anything he could, but caught nothing. "Oh, butterscotch! Dindle!" Byron wailed as his henchman slipped over the edge. Byron climbed closer to the ledge to see that Dindal remained swinging, suspended by his torn overcoat that had snagged upon the guardrail.
Dindal, you're alive! Oh, thank goodness!
Byron heaved breathless.
Mr. Byron, sir,
Dindal said, hanging by his snagged coat over the abyss.
Apologies for the inconveniences, sir.
He removed his hat and placed it over his chest, his feet dangling. Above him, Byron turned his attention to calculate the distance across the gap to the cart. He couldn't jump all the way across, but with one big leap he could make it to Dindal's head, and from there to the open carriage door. If only Dindal's overcoat stitching would hold for a few seconds more. But how reasonable was that assumption? Byron analyzed the possibilities as he swung his arms to build up momentum. He didn't like to gamble and preferred to assess hard numbers, which he deemed more reliable. He was going to have to take a chance. His fate, the fate of the most important man in all of Giant's Crown, rested on just how certain he was that Dindal's overcoat was more than just a flashy imitation. Now, Dindal had been a very affordable minion, but was still paid well enough to spare for a double-stitched overcoat. Perhaps Dindal was not nearly as clever or frugal as himself, who had never sprung for the double stitch in his life. Because honestly, how often would you need such a thing? This question forced him to rethink his initial assessment. He knew that Dindal only owned one suit, but it was a very fine suit, allegedly imported from Belgard. He was about to bank his life on Dindal's reckless spending habits, and more precisely, his choice of tailor. If he'd used the second-rate tailor from the dredge, then a single stitch was certain. Ultimately, he reckoned that Dindal preferred to appear cultivated and would never be caught dead in the dredge. Therefore, it was very likely that his suit was indeed imported from Belgard, in which case...
Double stitch,
Byron whispered to himself, confident in his assessment. There was no doubt. Byron looked out across the gap to the carriage, then down to his helpless henchman.
My dear Dindal, you've always been like a son to me, my boy, so it pains me to see you go.
Now, dangling by nothing more than the threads on his suit coat, Dindal responded with great pride.
It was my pleasure to serve you one last time, sir.
He gave his boss one final salute. Byron's eyes narrowed with determination as he wound up and sprung out onto the dwarf's head, leaping off of it, then tumbling into the side of the carriage door. Dindal's double-stitch overcoat ripped entirely, and he dropped into the mist below, where he was never seen again. Sombre, Byron saluted into the mists before reaching with his leg to kick the lever to disengage the brake. As they sprinted in pursuit of Byron, Oliff shoved Mao away from a collapsing pillar as the walls crumbled to pieces around them. When they both looked up at the rail station, the carriage where they'd left Dindal was already gone. In the distance, they could see Byron's eggplant suit jutting off down the rail along the giant's arm toward the city.
"Byron, you bastard!"
Oliff cried. Was there any shred of humanity left in that man? In despair, Oliff fell to his knees.
"We were so close. And this is how it ends?"
"No, it's not." Mao grabbed his shirt. "One more day. You said. No, you promised." Oliff pressed his hand gently against the boy's desperate face and smiled. He'd been robbed of several years and looked much older now, but he was still the same boy that Oliff had always known and loved. So optimistic, so full of life and hope. The floor heaved as the entire peach they were in teetered. Oliff reached into his satchel and pulled out the skyhook that he'd used for ziplining between deliveries. The railing system was different in the canopy, but the hook would work on any rail. It was the only way down, and they had only seconds before the whole peach came loose. He untied his scarf and used it to fasten the skyhook around Mao's arm. Mao looked down, then back at his Earth father. "But what about you? How will you get down?" "It's, kind of a one-man ticket," Oliff said. "The skyhook can only hold enough weight for one of us, but, don't you worry. I'll be right behind you." Mao didn't believe him. Oliff stopped to look at him one last time and couldn't help but smile, gentle and proud. It was a look that Mao had not seen in a long time. "Listen, you won't have to worry about me getting all overprotective anymore, kiddo." He ruffled Mao's shaggy hair. "After all, you're all grown up now, and you got a big journey ahead of you if you're going to go train with them there tough guy monks at Crescent Isle, you know." "Wait, you mean we got a big journey, right?" Mao insisted. "What are you talking about?" Oliff didn't respond. Mao flung his arm as far around him as he could reach. Tears squeezed from the corner of his eyes. Hey now. "We got no time for sniffles," Oliff said. "You know, one of us has got to go get Barty, and you know you're the best man for the job." He lifted his son and latched the other end of the hook onto the rail. As Mao glanced over the edge of the city crumbling to pieces below him, he gripped Oliff's shirt. Oliff nodded.
I'll catch up to you in a little bit. Now go.
He smacked the lock on the skyhook and shoved the boy off down the track. Mao twirled from the hook as he departed the platform down the rail toward what remained of the city. The giant shook the tree violently once more. As Mao was hurled away from the station, he heard a loud crack. The entire peach upon which his earth father stood jostled from its branch and snapped off the tree. As the last peach on Giant's Crown fell from its canopy, so too did Oliff of Tuksa.